hotspotting.com.au, and this is the Good News Bulletin, which I'm bringing you every day or most days to provide some balance to the sensational negativity in mainstream media, particularly in the newspaper published by Fairfax, such as the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review, which long ago gave up any pretense of being quality publications. Now, the latest price data has been published this week by another Fairfax entity, which is called Domain, and this shows the situation with house prices in the capital cities up to the 1st of April. It shows that in the March quarter there were increases for Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Hobart, Darwin and Canberra, and no change for Adelaide and Perth. The national average was a rise of 1.7% for the quarter and an annual increase of 9% across the capital cities. And to provide an idea of how strong some markets were as we entered the virus shutdown period, here's the annual price growth numbers from Domain for sections of the Melbourne market. In annual terms, the outer east rose 13%, the Mornington Peninsula was up almost 10%, the inner east 13%, the inner south 12%, the inner city 18%, and the northwest precinct rose 8.5%. Domain senior research analyst Nicola Powell says in the short term it's likely that we will see prices ease from these record highs. We have to remember, however, that it's short term and this is a government imposed business shutdown. Once that virus is contained, prices are likely to rebound. Now, we also had the latest retail figures published by the Bureau of Statistics. They released data showing that retail sales rose 8.2% in March. The March surge was the largest monthly jump spending on record, eclipsing the previous record of 8.1% set in June 2000 ahead of the introduction of the GST. Now, supermarkets and grocery stores drove the lift along with alcohol and specialised food sales. Food sales are up 23.5%. Toilet and tissue paper sales more than doubled as the sales of flour, rice and pasta, and there was a 50% jump in canned foods, cleaning products and medicinal products. The Bureau of Statistics noted there was a peak in mid-March before sales started to level off towards the end of the month as people ran out of space to store their goods. Other areas to benefit were the electrical and hardware sectors. And I would point out that the Financial Review and the Age in Melbourne, Fairfax newspapers, managed to find a way to report both the upturn in retail statistics and the strong house price performance in the March quarter in a highly negative way, because that's what they do. They just can't help themselves. Now, another statistic that illustrates the unusual times in which we are operating is the latest data from Netflix. Netflix added more than twice as many net new subscribers as they had expected in the first quarter of the year, as consumers from many countries, including Australia, stayed at home due to the pandemic and hunted for ways to entertain themselves. The streaming giant said it added 15.8 million new net paid customers around the world during the quarter. It expected only half as many for that period. And it says, like other home entertainment services, we're seeing temporarily higher viewing and increased membership growth. We expect viewing to decline and membership growth to decelerate as the home confinement ends, which we hope is soon, and we heartily agree with that sentiment. Turning to some stimulus measures that have been announced in the last 24 hours in Victoria, the state government has announced it's extending the $20,000 first home owner grant for an extra 12 months for people buying or building a home in regional Victoria. This grant is one of many reasons why regional Victorian markets have been booming lately and have been collectively the strongest market in Australia, in my opinion. State Treasurer Tim Pallas says the regional grant was due to end in June, but will now be extended until the middle of 2021. And he says, we know the pandemic is making it even tougher for young people to achieve their dreams of home ownership. That's why we're extending the grant, which has helped so many regional Victorians. And the grant will be available, or was available rather, across 48 regional council areas in Victoria. Also in Victoria, the state government plans to reinvigorate the state economy by fast-tracking big dollar construction projects. They plan to bring forward billions of dollars worth of construction while also investing in more rail and road infrastructure. The flow-on economic impacts could form the centrepiece of the road to recovery along with tax reform. Palace says the government will borrow up to $24.5 billion in emergency funding, and that the government is looking at ways to kickstart the economy, including fast-tracking construction of new schools and implementing a maintenance program for old schools, boosting the number of major road and rail projects, partnering with super funds, businesses and councils to deliver more works, and boosting training facilities to provide skills to help projects happen. In Queensland, the state government has set up an emergency fund of $3.2 billion to help the state deal with the consequences of the pandemic period. It's designed to give the government the ability to respond rapidly to issues that arise in the health system or in the economy. And apparently it's been the first time such an advance has been used since the global financial crisis in 2008. Queensland Treasurer Jackie Trad says the funds will protect citizens, preserve industries, invest in productive public services, and plan for an economic recovery that sustains us all. She says $311 million in payroll relief for businesses and $9 million in relief for commercial landlords has already been paid out. The government has announced that it expects to spend $4 billion in total across its economic rescue package and the COVID-19 health response. Now, in the Northern Territory, council rates can now be deferred or waived with the help of a $13 million injection from the Northern Territory government, relieving businesses facing hardship. That's split between two pools, a $6 million package to allow local governments to apply for funding to help defer rates, ensuring operations aren't affected through offering relief which is passed on to ratepayers. And the Northern Territory government's one-off $7 million special community assistance and local employment grant will help councils create more jobs to better respond to the coronavirus situation. In the resources sector, industry experts suggest that China is Australia's best bet in leading the nation out of the economic downturn. The director of the Australian Centre on China at the Australian National University, Professor Jane Golly, says China may have been the cause of the current health crisis, but is also the country most likely to get Australia back on track economically. She says China's economy is so large and so important to us in trade and investment terms that even if growth there slows, and it clearly will, it still seems to be Australia's best bet for sustaining our own economic growth rates in the future. Despite China's GDP shrinking in the first quarter of this year, JP Morgan economists have predicted China as the pandemic's first in, first out economy. Golly says China's economy has taken a hit, but it appears the country has brought infection rates under control with an economic recovery quickly following. She says the Chinese governments are masters of fiscal stimulus, and they are really the masters of a whole range of government tools, tricks they've got up their sleeve to boost growth if they can, and I think they'll continue to grow this year faster than just about any other economy in the world. And supporting that notion, I note that the International Monetary Fund said in its new report last week that it is forecasting economic growth in China this year and very strong growth, around 9%, next year. And that's good news for Australia because China is our biggest trading partner. And I think it means another resources boom in Australia starting later this year. On that subject, the $200 million Ravenswood expansion project in North Queensland is going ahead and is expected to extend the life of gold mining in the region by 10 or 15 years as they employ up to 350 people, mostly hired locally. This follows the sale of the mine to Ravenswood Gold on the 1st of April, and their CEO, Brett Fletcher, says that he's excited about the prospect of a long life, low cost, large scale operation focused on gold. The plan is to recommence mining in the second half of the year, and then it will be a slow build up of jobs, he said. Turning to the property market, the National Agency Rain & Horne says a combination of new technologies, old school sales skills and pre-approved mortgages are enabling vendors around Australia to find motivated buyers for their properties in many cases. According to the real estate group, provided agents continue to put motivated buyers and sellers together, the property market won't succumb too badly to the pandemic period. The group says that technologies such as virtual 3D tour technologies are working well in getting buyers to take an interest in properties. However, it says it's the selling skills employed at private inspections that seem to be getting transactions over the line in this market. They say at private inspections, agents must engage with buyers. It's no longer a case of standing at the door of an open home, which are no longer allowed, and taking names and numbers. Now with one-on-one inspections, agents must take the time to get to know their buyers and understand what they want. And they say, this is how we did real estate 20 years ago, and in the current environment, it's working. Yes, and one of the potential benefits of the virus period is that we won't just go back to the old normal, but employ some of the outcomes and innovations that have been forced upon us by the shutdown period. And looking more broadly, some of the changes that I see coming out of this include more people working from home through technology, with people then making lifestyle choices like moving out of the big cities, and a revitalisation of manufacturing in Australia, because we've realised the folly of having so many things made in one place, i.e. China, and the end of business call centres located offshore, bringing that back to Australia. Greater use of technology to communicate and hold meetings, for example, and on a different subject, noticing how much less pollution there is lately, and a whole lot more. And I'd like to hear your ideas about that. If you have some thoughts about how the virus shutdown has forced changes that may benefit Australia in the long run, please email me on ryder@hotspotting.com.au. I'd love to hear your comments and your ideas. Now, looking at some of the developments that have been progressed or announced in the last 24 hours, a $123 million vertical school will be built at the centre of a residential and retail hub in northwest Sydney, catering for nearly 2,000 students. The Catholic Education Diocese of Parramatta has made plans to construct a co-educational school called Santa Sophia Catholic College at Box Hill. The state government is forging ahead with plans to build up to 9,600 homes at Box Hill, which is part of its northwest growth area, set for more intensive residential and commercial development. Under the plan, 4 linked buildings will include learning areas, creative and performance hubs, rooftop play spaces and sports facilities for 1,860 kindergarten to year 12 students and 130 staff. In Perth, one of the most densely populated areas, is set for more residents, with developer Finbar seeking approval for a 31-storey tower in Adelaide Terrace with 119 apartments and other components. The joint project with Ventrade Australia would involve demolishing Townsend Lodge on a 1,700 square metre block of land. In the Coffs Harbour area of New South Wales, a $100 million retirement village is planned for Park Beach. The developers Barkrack Normberger Group are constructing the gated retirement village dubbed Shoreline, which would be Coffs Harbour's largest ever privately funded construction, including 185 apartments and townhouses, an aged care facility with 120 beds. Now, surprisingly, German supermarket giant Kaufland has submitted a planning application to develop and operate a supermarket in Geelong. That's surprising because it actually announced last year it was withdrawing from Australia. It had spent $500 million on its recent move to enter the Australian market, hiring 200 employees and organising more than 20 prospective sites for supermarkets before ditching the idea, deciding to concentrate its business on its core markets in Europe. But the retail giant appears to have resurrected plans to build a store at Highton in Geelong, sitting opposite the Warren Pond Shopping Centre. The City of Greater Geelong this week confirmed that it had received a planning application for a Kaufland supermarket on the site. Now, as the last word, I'm wondering how many of you would get this right. If I asked you which location in Australia won the title for best performing market in the nation based on house price growth over the past 5 years, where do you think the money would go? Somewhere in Sydney maybe, somewhere in Melbourne? Well, according to Simon Presley of Propertyology, who is a researcher and real estate professional I have a lot of respect for, the answer is Brighton in Tasmania, just on the fringe of the Hobart metropolitan area. Its median house price has risen 75% in the past 5 years. And Presley says that the analysis is yet another piece of compelling evidence which confirms that population growth is far from the biggest influence on property market performance. The population of the Brighton local government area grew by just 9.2% over those 5 years, but its prices grew 75%. Presley makes this comment because some simplistic analysts would have us believe that population growth is the prime factor in driving real estate prices, whereas at Hotspotting we see population growth as one of many factors to consider in choosing growth locations in the real estate market. Now, Presley says not only does this result bust the population myth, but also defies the commonly held belief that the capital city is a better performance than the regional areas. In the past 2 years, the outstanding locations for price growth, as far as I'm concerned, have been Tasmania and regional Victoria, and this shows up in the research published by Propertyology. With respect to improving property prices over the last 5 years, Brighton is number one, but the next two are also Hobart area. Hobart City was runner-up, and with price growth of 62%, and then comes the local government area of Glenorchy, which is in the northern suburbs of Hobart, a 58% increase in its median house prices over 5 years. Then looking more broadly across the nation, strong performances we're seeing also in the Hepburn and Alpine local government areas in Victoria, which both saw 60% increases over 5 years. And it's only then that some locations in the big cities start to feature. The Brimbank local government area in Melbourne and the very upmarket Mossman area in Sydney both grew their median house prices 57% over 5 years. And there are also strong house price performances for regional municipalities, including Mitchell in Victoria, Snowy Monaro in New South Wales, Wingecarribee, that's the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, Lithgow in New South Wales, Kempsey, Byron Bay, Noosa in Queensland, Georgetown in Tasmania, and Shoalhaven in New South Wales, which all grew somewhere between 45 and 50% over 5 years. Okay, so that's the Good News Bulletin for today. If you have any comments or questions, please email me on ryder@hotspotting.com.au. And don't forget our webinar next week at lunchtime on Wednesday, where my guest presenter will be Miriam Sankula, who will be discussing different scenarios in the market in the current unusual circumstances and ways to deal with them. So I hope you'll join us then. Miriam Sankula, award-winning buyer's agent with the business Property Mavens, based in Melbourne, and also a best-selling author of a very good book on property investment. So join us then Wednesday next week at lunchtime for that webinar. Bye for now.